A fitness instructor walks into a seemingly empty church on a dark and stormy Monday morning. This wasn't unusual for Missy Beavers, who often taught classes at the Creekside Church in Midlothian, Texas. Only this time, Missy wasn't alone. Surveillance captured over 30 minutes of her perpetrator, but today, the culprit is still at large. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at 5 cases, just like Missy's, that despite surveillance coverage, eyewitness testimonials, is still unsolved today. Hi everyone, I'm back with another episode of A Little Bit Human's Tea After Dark. As any avid follower of true crime will tell you, sometimes there's just a case so powerful, so disturbing, that it just sticks with you. Today, we're going to be looking at 5 cases that have stuck with me, because despite surveillance, GPS tracking, eyewitness testimonials, is still unsolved today. The cases that we're going to look at today did not happen decades ago, before DNA, before social media. They happen in modern day with modern age smartphone technology and GPS tracking and forensic science, making it even more of an anomaly as to how some of these cases are still unsolved. Before we dive in, I need to mention this new tea that I'm drinking today, courtesy of Catland Books, an occult shop here in Brooklyn. It is called The Moon. It is really, really good. Catland has everything from books to crystals to tarot decks. They're my favorite occult shop. They also have a catalog of really cool online classes. I've taken a few of them. I highly recommend them. They're really educational. They're super fun if you want to learn a little bit more about folklore or deities or really anything that has to do with the occult. I love the instructors, so just putting that out there. I'm going to drop a link below if you want to check it out, catlandbooks.com. Again, highly recommended. Today I'm drinking The Moon. What the fuck is in this? Chamomile, mugwort, hops, elderflower, marshmallow root. They make it themselves with love, with witchy spells and spooky vibes. Exactly everything we are here. So let's do it. Let's dive into today's episode. Grab a beverage, tea, whiskey, whatever you're drinking, light some candles, and let's take off on this really fucked up, morbid ride we're about to embark on. I'm going to start with a case today that really haunts me. And all of the cases I'm going to cover do haunt me in some capacity. But this one in particular, more so than any other. Why? I don't know. Maybe because it's so fucking terrifying, but there's something about this case that just doesn't quite sit with me, especially how it's not yet unsolved. I listened to an episode about Missy for the first time. It was True Crime Garage, which, by the way, is a really good podcast. And when I'm not exaggerating when I say that I literally could not sleep that night. The surveillance footage, just the environment surrounding everything that happened to Missy. If you are unfamiliar with this case, you might sleep with the lights on tonight because it is wild. Missy was a wife, she was a mother of 3, and very, very passionate about fitness. She worked for a company called Camp Gladiator. I've never taken any of their classes, but the research I've done, it seems to me they're very similar to CrossFit. A lot of obstacle courses, a lot of group activities. They do all these workout classes outside, and everything is led by a personal trainer. On the morning of April 18th, 2016, Missy headed to Creekside Church in Midlothian, Texas. Midlothian is about 25 miles or so south from Dallas, and it has a crime rate lower than the national average. It's deemed a very safe city in the US. Creekside Church was not an unfamiliar location. Missy had taught a slew of classes there in the past. So this morning, like any other, was your typical Monday morning. However, when class attendees arrived shortly after 5 a.m., they stumbled upon a grisly discovery: Missy's lifeless body. Investigators came quickly to the scene and initially thought that Missy stumbled upon a robbery gone wrong. It was customary for Missy to open up the front doors of the church and unlock the premises, presumably if one of her class attendees needed to use the restroom. It's also really important to note that this particular Monday morning was bad weather. torrential downpours. So maybe Missy was scouting the inside to see if maybe she can move everybody in. They did often teach these classes outside, and they were going to have the class under an awning. But it might not be far-fetched to think that maybe she popped her head to see if maybe they could move inside due to the weather. Whatever the reason is that Missy entered the church, she came face to face with her killer. Investigators immediately contacted Missy's husband, Brandon, who was in Mississippi on an annual fishing trip. They began to put the pieces together of the steps that morning that led Missy to her untimely fate. As mentioned, investigators thought Missy was at the wrong place at the wrong time. Perhaps somebody broke into the church to steal the AV equipment, or it was a Monday morning, so the day prior was Sunday Mass. Perhaps they thought they would find the cash donations laying around somewhere. They were really trying to understand why someone would break in. But what was specifically weird about the situation was that Missy's wedding ring was still on her finger. She had an iPad with her that wasn't touched, and nothing at all was missing from the church. So why was somebody in the church at all at 3, 4, 5 a.m. in the morning? Well, this is where things get a little creepy. Investigators obtained surveillance from inside the church, where they spotted their suspect, an individual from head to toe covered in police tactical gear. I'm talking about the uniform that you would see police wearing in the middle of riots. A helmet, vest, boots, literally the whole shebang. The culprit is seen meandering through the hallways, walking up and down, opening and closing doors, shattering glass. There's a little urgency in their movement. You would think that if somebody were to rob a church, they would be in and out. I'm no criminal mastermind. Maybe I am. But truly, if you're gonna rob a business, a house, anything, don't you want to be in and out? The quicker you are, the less likely you'll leave DNA or any clues behind whatsoever that can pin you to the crime. The suspect in question was seen walking through the church for almost 30 minutes. So if they weren't there to rob the church, what were they doing? This footage led police to uncover an even more sinister motive. They were likely waiting for Missy. Police released the following footage to the public, urging anyone to contact the department with any tips on who this mysterious cop, quote unquote, could be. I'm going to play the footage for you now. Take a look specifically at their strange mannerisms, specifically their unique walk. There's a lot to dissect here. First, as I stated earlier, this does not strike me as someone trying to rob the church. This is a crazy theory, but I tend to think burglars don't want to be caught. If someone wants to rob a house, a business, as I said before, they better know what they're looking for, know where it is, and do everything they can to break in and leave as quickly as possible. Walking around, slow moving, opening and closing doors like this fucking loser, meandering through a church you want to rob, it just doesn't seem plausible to me. Plus, at the end of the clip, it appears that they're holding a hammer, breaking maybe a small door window. I'm not really quite sure, but it's kind of a strange move. Why would someone be breaking random glass windows if they want to rob a church? Do they have some deep-rooted hatred towards the Catholic religion? Maybe. Or something even more fucked up, are they staging a break-in? Are they trying to throw law enforcement off, making them think that Missy just stumbled upon a robbery, wrong place, wrong time? To me, that's a more likely scenario. There are a ton of theories that flood the internet, full of sleuth detectives that all have these grandiose theories or conspiracies as to what happened to Missy. Unfortunately, police have been very tight-lipped about the case. There have been no press conferences, no press releases, no statements to the public. To this day, we have little more information on what happened to Missy. This is especially alarming, as not only do investigators have ample footage of the suspect inside the church, they also obtained footage from a gun shop across the highway, SWFA Outdoors, who gave investigators this footage. The footage shows a silver Nissan Altima slowly circling the parking lot, turning their lights on and off, through it all during a very heavy downpour. Again, just something out of a terrifying horror movie. To this day, police have not identified the driver of the car. nor have any indication whether or not this person is involved with Missy's death. It's very possible that this was just a random person that pulled off to the side of the road, an empty parking lot, to check their phone. Maybe they were lost. Or this could be somebody that knows something, somebody that could give investigators that one piece of information needed to finally solve this case. Additionally, law enforcement have never released Missy's official cause of death. We also don't know anything official about the suspect themselves. The age, gender, race are all up for speculation. Nobody to this day actually knows anything more than what we see on surveillance. Crime Stoppers of Ellis County is seeking any information whatsoever on Missy's case. If you have any details, no matter how big or small, please contact the number below. Another doozy coming your way. Next up is the mysterious murder of Canadian real estate agent Lindsay Buziak. Lindsay was a 24-year-old budding real estate agent who was known by her friends to be deeply ambitious and passionate about her career. She worked for her boyfriend's mother's real estate company, Zalo Real Estate Group, in Victoria, Canada, a suburban area of Saanich. Lindsay's boyfriend Jason was also a real estate agent, and at the time of her death, the two had been together for a little over a year. In late January 2008, Lindsay receives a strange phone call from a potential client looking to buy a home for her and her husband. They have a budget of around $1 million, and their only stipulation is that they want something completely brand new. They don't want anybody at the home, they don't want something already furnished, and they want something fast. I'm talking they want to see a showing within the next couple of days. At first glance, this sort of seems like a dream phone call, but a few things struck Lindsay as really peculiar. First, the woman called Lindsay's personal cell phone, not her work phone. And when Lindsay asked her how she got her information, she gave Lindsay the name of a former client of the firm. I'm going to get back to that one in a minute. Furthermore, Lindsay noted to her colleagues, her father, and her boyfriend that there was something really off about this woman's accent. Lindsay described it as Spanish or Mexican, but not really. She felt that the woman was putting on a fake accent, doing so to potentially conceal her real voice. She was also confused as to why she, of all people, were sought out for a listing of this size. I mean, Lindsay was a 24-year-old. She wasn't really that well versed in the area yet. She didn't have a ton of experience. You would think that somebody looking for a $1 million home would probably look for somebody that has had tons of experience. I don't know. I mean, it seems pretty fucking obvious. So Lindsay sort of had every right to be a little cautious and weirded out by this ordeal. How did this person get her information, and why were they so gung-ho on having Lindsay show them a home? Now, back to the reference. When Lindsay hung up the phone with the new client, she decided to call her former client just to make sure that everything was okay. She wanted to make sure that this woman did, in fact, give her information to this new client and to ensure everything checked out. Unfortunately, Lindsay was unable to reach her. Her assistant had said that she was out of town and would be doing quite a bit of traveling and wasn't due back for some time. However, Lindsay figured that everything was probably fine. In fact, her boyfriend was really adamant about her doing the showing. He not only specified that this was going to be huge commission, which rightfully so, a $1 million sale is probably going to be hundreds of thousands of commission. And plus, it would just be really great for Lindsay's career. This was going to establish her in the real estate world. And as I said before, her career meant a lot to her. Her boyfriend also offered to be present with her at the property during the showing. This allegedly put Lindsay at ease. And despite all the red flags, she decided to move forward. And that's exactly what she did. Within a few days, Lindsay found a suitable home based on the client's needs and scheduled a showing for Saturday, February 2nd at 5:30 p.m. On February 2nd, Lindsay and Jason grabbed a late lunch and paid the bill around 4:30 p.m. They took separate cars, and presumably Lindsay went to go get ready for the showing. Her boyfriend had plans that night. He was spending time with one of his friends and was going to pick him up at a nearby auto body shop. He assured Lindsay that he would be there at the property during the showing, and the two parted ways. However, that's not really quite how it goes down. Jason sends Lindsay a text that he's running late. The two exchange a few messages, with Lindsay sending her boyfriend the last message he will ever receive from her. Gotta go, they're here. Now, as Jason is running behind, Lindsay is seen in the area chatting with two individuals. A Caucasian male with dark hair, likely somewhere in his mid to late 30s, and a smaller, blonde, petite woman who's wearing a very distinct dress. You can see it here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but I wanted to emphasize that Lindsay and the couple spent enough time outside that people in the area not only remembered exactly what this couple looked like, but they can recall the distinct pattern of the dress that the woman was wearing. It's an important note. Additionally, a few things I want to point out about the house itself before we move on. It rests on a cul-de-sac and had significant street traffic, and as you can see, a few other properties very close alongside of it. This isn't a secluded house in the middle of nowhere, deep in the woods. This is as close as you can get to your neighbors. After a few more minutes of chit-chatting, Lindsay and the couple head inside the house, and Jason sends her a text that he's on his way, a text that Lindsay never received. Jason and his friend arrive at the property around 5:40. Jason will later tell investigators that as he pulled up to the house, he actually saw the couple outside. Just them, no trace of Lindsay. When the couple notice him, they quickly go back inside the house. This is the last time they are spotted at the residence. Jason begins to grow suspicious. Lindsay is not answering any of his texts or calls, and his gut is telling him that something is just off. After a few more minutes of no response from Lindsay, Jason decides to go up to the front door, something that he finds very strange. The front door is locked. As a realtor, Jason knows that this is not standard practice, and this is the last red flag. He immediately calls 911. Now, as Jason is on the phone with 911, his friend scales the perimeter of the home, goes to the back, and finds the door is unlocked. He makes his way inside. He unlocks the front door, letting Jason into the home. Jason spots Lindsay's shoes in the foyer and runs upstairs, where he finds Lindsay's body laying in a pool of blood in the main bedroom. When investigators and paramedics get to the scene, Lindsay is pronounced dead. She was stabbed over 40 times in the back, so detectives think that she was caught off guard. She had not been sexually assaulted, and nothing was taken from the home or from Lindsay. Investigators found no DNA at the crime scene other than Lindsay's. They traced the phone used to contact Lindsay and found that it had been purchased months prior. Even more shocking, no other calls or text messages, both incoming or outgoing, were ever received on that phone. That phone was only used to correspond with Lindsay. The name registered to the phone was Paulo Rodriguez, which police believe is a fake name. The phone was also traced back to a business, but police don't think that business has anything to do with Lindsay's murder. They think the killers just found a random business and tied the name to the phone. The phone had been discarded, never used again after Lindsay's murder. Between the phone and lack of DNA, investigators not only believe that this was obviously premeditated, but they think this was a hit. This strikes me as odd. I too believe that this was a hit, but I find it very strange that these two individuals seemed so aloof at hiding their identities. The woman's wearing this flashy dress. They're out having a conversation with Lindsay in broad daylight in the middle of this house. If it was a hired hit, they really didn't do much to conceal who they were, which makes it kind of frustrating because we don't know who they are. What's also strange is, why Lindsay? Why would somebody place a hit on a 24-year-old real estate agent? What could she have possibly done that would require somebody out to kill her? This wasn't a crime of passion. This was well thought out, premeditated, meticulously planned, down to the very minute that Lindsay took her last breath. It's been well over a decade, and no arrests or persons of interest have ever been named in Lindsay Buziak's murder. However, there are a ton of theories and conspiracies surrounding this case, everything from Lindsay's own boyfriend and his mother to Canadian drug cartels. Lindsay mentioned to her father a few months before her murder that she found out something she shouldn't have. She never elaborated on what that meant and never brought it up again, but it is a bizarre thing to say. Did Lindsay accidentally find something out about a local criminal drug pin? Did she stumble upon information regarding her boyfriend's mother's family business? Or perhaps was this a case of mistaken identity? Did somebody mistake Lindsay for somebody else, leaving her to pay the ultimate price? These questions are still unanswered today. If you do have any information on Lindsay, please contact Saanich Police at the number below. Moving to a case that has haunted Orlando, Florida for over 15 years is the mysterious disappearance of Jennifer Kesse. Jennifer Kesse was a 24-year-old finance manager for a timeshare company in Orlando, Florida. She was in a long-term and serious relationship with her boyfriend, Rob, and currently lived by herself in a one-bedroom condo. Everything seemed to be going really well for Jennifer. She had a great career, she had a great relationship, but something was about to change. Jennifer's life was going to take a very dramatic turn on January 23, 2006. Before we discuss the suspicious events that led up to Jennifer's disappearance, let's talk about where she was the week prior. The week before, Jennifer was out of the country on vacation with her boyfriend Rob in the Caribbean. They flew back to the US on January 22nd, and Lindsay stayed at Rob's apartment in Fort Lauderdale. The next morning, which was a Monday, she drove back to Orlando and went to work as usual. She completed a day of work as usual and headed home that night, where she spoke to her parents on the phone. They recalled her talking about her trip, noting how great of a time she had. Jennifer did not seem distressed. She did not seem upset. She did not mention going anywhere. As far as her parents were concerned, Jennifer seemed great, and their conversation was completely normal. Evidently, the distance between the two was starting to strain their relationship. Jennifer lived in Orlando and Rob lived in Fort Lauderdale, which is about a 3-hour drive. So these two were pretty much conducting a long-distance relationship, and the basis of their fight was about their future. Rob also mentioned during their conversation somebody knocked at Jennifer's front door. She assumed it was a neighbor and didn't seem overly concerned about the knock, so Rob didn't make much of the event during the conversation. He remembered Jennifer saying that she was tired, she would be going to sleep, and the two wrapped up their conversation. When they ended the phone call, Rob remembered Jennifer saying that she was really tired from a long day at work and from traveling and would be going right to sleep. The next morning, Rob attempted to call Jennifer, but it went straight to voicemail. He remembered her saying something about having a really important meeting, so he assumed that she would just call him back later in the day. Except Jennifer never made it to work. Her manager was very concerned about Jennifer being a no-show. This was completely out of character and contacted Jennifer's parents to see if they knew where Jennifer was. When her family was also unsuccessful at getting in touch with Jennifer, they immediately jumped in their car and made the hour-and-a-half drive from Tampa to Orlando. When her family arrived at Jennifer's condo, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There was a wet bathroom towel on the floor, and her walls were still wet, indicating Jennifer or somebody likely took a shower that morning. She also had a couple of pieces of clothing laid out on her bed, assuming that Jennifer was, like any other girl, trying to figure out what to wear that morning. Her clothes from the day before also hung on the back of a chair in her bedroom. Nothing was missing from her apartment other than her phone, her keys, and her purse. However, her car was not in the parking lot. All the clues pointed to Jennifer getting ready and heading to work that morning, but Jennifer was nowhere to be found. Jennifer's family calls the cops, and immediately a missing persons investigation begins. 2 days later, on January 26th, police get a tip regarding Jennifer's car. An individual that lives in another apartment complex about a mile away from Jennifer's condo report that a 2004 Chevy Malibu, one that looks exactly like Jennifer's and had been displayed all over the local news, was sitting in the apartment complex. They indicate that the car had been there for a couple of days. Police immediately head over and canvass the area. They obtain video surveillance from the parking lot, hoping to see who and when drove Jennifer's car. Before I show the footage, I need to preface it that this is one of the most infuriating pieces of coverage ever, and you will see why in a minute. The footage starts with someone driving and attempting to park Jennifer's car. You then see a very grainy image of the unknown driver walking away from the car. They're too far from the camera to make out their appearance, but it does look as if they're wearing a white jumpsuit or white shirt and pants. If you notice, the footage jumps every few seconds. It's not a continuous frame. We get a fairly close shot of the individual at the 50-second mark. But because the video jumps every couple of seconds, and you could not have timed this if you tried, the face of the suspect is blocked by the two thick guardrails of the gate. They walk at the perfect speed. And I know that they didn't do this intentionally, but I can't still fathom of how we have surveillance. It's a pretty close shot. And yet they are completely blocked. Their face, any defining character traits of who this person could be is gone. We have no idea. Police have no idea who this perpetrator is. At first glance, you see a fair-skinned individual with what appears to be maybe like a man bun or a ponytail or maybe even a hat or a mullet. There's something in the back of their head and you really can't quite make out, but I think it's something similar to some type of high bun or a ponytail. What's weird too is what they're wearing. They're wearing all white. And again, it could be a jumpsuit. It to me kind of looks like they're just wearing a white shirt and white pants. They have the black boots on. Maybe it's a painter's uniform. It looks like they're potentially in construction or working outside in some capacity. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just what they put on that morning. Maybe they're not a worker outside. But for me, I don't know why, but I keep thinking painter. Their height is maybe 5'7"-ish. Police skew them to be pretty petite, maybe even smaller than 5'7". It's kind of hard to tell based on the surveillance and looking at the gate pillars. I think maybe somewhere around 5'7", but because of the angle of the camera, they could actually be a lot smaller than that. Similar to Missy Beavers, we really don't know much about the suspect. We don't know their ethnicity. We don't know their gender. There's very, very, very little to work with here. Some theories as to what happened to Jennifer surround sex trafficking, some focus on an ex-boyfriend of hers, and even potentially on a current coworker. Allegedly, there was a man at work that had a big crush on Jennifer, and it was not reciprocated. There's also a story that Jennifer visited another apartment complex shortly before her disappearance. She met with an apartment manager to get some information on moving, and allegedly she seemed very on edge. She was looking over her shoulder, she was looking out the window, checking out which cars were in the parking lot, who was coming and going. Apparently she also left kind of abruptly and kind of in a hurry. This story has never been officially confirmed by authorities, but I have a feeling that might hold some weight. When Jennifer's family entered her condo, there was no sign of a break-in. Furthermore, as mentioned earlier, her family didn't see anything out of the ordinary. So if she did, in fact, leave that morning to go to work, something had to have happened to Jennifer from the second she left her apartment and walked outside to getting in her car. And I say if she did get ready the night before, because if you want to go down that rabbit hole, there is a ton of speculation that Jennifer may have left her apartment the night before. This is the most likely scenario based on police reports, but unfortunately to this day, Jennifer is still missing. If you have any information on Jennifer's whereabouts or what happened to her, you can contact the Orlando Police Department at either of the tip numbers below. This one sucks. Big time trigger warning as it involves children, two sweet babies murdered at the Delphi Historic Trails in Delphi, Indiana. This is the case of best friends Libby German and Abby Williams. The one tiny morsel of good news about this case is that it might actually be really close to getting solved. Hopefully. But before we cover that, here is a brief rundown on what happened February 13th, 2017. The day these two beautiful girls were brutally murdered. Abby and Libby were both 8th grade students at Delphi Community Middle School, and on February 13th, they both had the day off for an administrative day. It was a beautiful day. For being the middle of February, the temperature was super mild, it was really sunny, so the girls decided that they wanted to spend the bulk of their day outside. They were dropped off at the Delphi Historic Trails by Libby's sister around 1:30 in the afternoon. They were told that Libby's father would come around 3:15. So right off the bat, we have a very small window to work with. So whatever happened to these girls happens very fast. Libby's father arrived around 3:15 as expected, but the girls were nowhere to be found. He called their phones, he called out for them, he looked around the premises, but he couldn't find them anywhere. He immediately formed a search party. I will say the girls, their parents stepped into action quick. They called family and friends and had a search party at the Delphi Trails around 5:30. So again, from 1:30 to 5:30, they've already sprung into action. Again, very small window here. Search efforts continue into the next day, where the worst case scenario unfolds. The bodies of Abby and Libby were found about half a mile away from their last known location, an abandoned bridge along the trails. At 2:07 the day prior, Libby posted a photo of Abby on the bridge to her Snapchat. This was the last time anyone had heard from the girls. Investigators did not release a cause of death, but did rule it was indeed a homicide, and an investigation began immediately. Indiana State Police found significant evidence on Libby's phone, and within just 24 hours of locating the bodies, released a grainy image of an unknown man on the same abandoned bridge the girls were the day prior. As you can see here, he's walking forward, hands in his pockets, and he's wearing quite a few layers of clothing, a jacket, a hat. This seems strange to me. As I mentioned, it was very warm on this day, hitting almost 70 degrees. I've pondered why somebody would wear so much clothing, especially on such a warm day. And for me, this is one major indicator that this may have been potentially planned. We'll touch on theory soon, but for somebody to wear so much clothing, maybe they were trying to conceal their identity. Or worst off, if they knew going into the situation that they were attempting to abduct or otherwise, maybe they wore a ton of clothing for padding because they suspected a potential fight. To be honest, it's just fucking disgusting thinking about it. In addition to this still shot, police released an audio clip obtained from Libby's phone, with the perpetrator saying, "Down the hill." Down the hill. Down the hill. It's a bit muffled, as you can hear, but it does indeed sound like he is saying "down the hill," which leads us to think that he was instructing the girls to another location. It's also really important to note that Libby likely recorded him in secret. The wherewithal for this girl to be so resourceful and use her phone in a dangerous situation and record this fucking creep. I have no doubt in my mind that the police are going to find who did this to Abby and Libby. But I also have no doubt in my mind that it's 100% because of Abby. It's her quick thinking that we will finally solve this case. A few months later, Indiana Police Department released this sketch to the public. It truly looks like the grainy image of the man on the bridge, everything down to the hat and the coat. But the case is about to take a bit of a strange turn. Although investigators released a composite sketch, a grainy image, and an audio clip, they were unsuccessful in this turning into an arrest. They received thousands of tips, followed on hundreds of leads, at various times had different persons of interest, but none of it brought them to Abby and Libby's murderer. In 2019, 2 years after the murder, police held a press conference where they unveiled new information, and it was shocking. They unveiled a new composite sketch that looked nothing like the original. I'm talking these two could not be more different. Investigators informed the public that this person shown here is the main suspect in the case, and this composite is the one people should be referencing when sending tips. This looks nothing like the guy on the bridge. This composite is of somebody who is clean-shaven, young, maybe between 18 to 25 if I had to make a guess. Where did they get this from? Where did they even get this description? And why now are they saying this is the composite that you need to be referencing when sending in tips? Additionally, police released more audio from the perpetrator and a short video. We know Libby took photos of the piece of shit, but it turns out she also took video. My girl. Seen here, police released a short clip of the suspect walking along the bridge. You can see he's moving forward towards the girls and is looking down, likely due to the uneven terrain of the bridge. The perpetrator initially says, "down the hill." As we said, we suspect that he is moving them to another location. In the updated audio clip, he distinctly says, "guys," right before he follows it with, "down the hill." You can hear it here.
Guys. Down the hill. Guys. Down the hill.
I'm not an expert in voice analysis by any means, but what I hear when I hear the clip of him saying, "guys, down the hill," I hear an older, mature man. I literally visualize the guy in the first sketch, the guy that's on the bridge. And I understand younger men, 18 and 25, sure. Can they have more distinguished, lower voices? Yeah, but there's something about it, something in my gut, that whenever this plays, whenever I hear the voice, I assume it's somebody much, much older. Another update was provided in December 2021, and it finally appears that we are getting close to solving this case. Police stumbled upon an online profile used between 2016 and 2017 under the name Anthony_shots. According to police, the profile was used to lure young girls in sending sexually explicit content. The page's profile features what looks like a Justin Bieber lookalike. Well, he is an actual professional model that has been ruled out by investigators. This is a complete catfish situation. The individual behind the page used the fake image to entice young girls to send nudes, leaving investigators wondering if Libby and Abby had been in contact with this person and if they possibly made arrangements to meet with somebody that day on the trails. A search warrant affidavit revealed the owner of the account to be a 27-year-old from Peru, Indiana, named Keegan Anthony Klein. Klein was arrested in 2020 and charged with 30 counts, including possession of child pornography, child exploitation, and obstruction of justice. He admitted to police that the social profile of Anthony_shots was indeed his, and he did use it to obtain nudes from underage girls. While Klein hasn't been officially named a suspect, authorities are urging anyone who has ever had any communication whatsoever with this account to contact local police immediately. This overview only touches the surface of this horrible, horrible case, and all we can hope is between Libby's quick thinking to the adamant work the Indiana Police Department are doing, this case will be solved soon. If you have any information whatsoever, please contact either the email or the phone number below. In March 2006, Brian was a second-year med student at Ohio State University. He was in a serious relationship with a fellow Ohio State med school student, Alexis. And though it appeared everything was going right for Brian, tragedy struck his family when his mother passed away from cancer that same month. According to friends, Brian was devastated by his mother's loss. They were really close, and his death hit really hard. Not to mention, he was also in med school. So it's fair to assume at this point in time, there was a lot of stress in Brian's life. So it made sense that him and Alexis decided to plan a week-long trip to Florida during spring break. But as fate would have it, Alexis would never take that trip with her boyfriend, as April 1st, 2006 was the last day anybody ever saw Brian again. Alexis and Brian were set to leave for Florida on Monday, April 3rd. The weekend before, as it started the beginning of spring break, Alexis decided to head home and spend the weekend with her family. Brian decided to stay in Columbus, in town, and go bar hopping with his friends. Columbus, Ohio is a fairly safe city, but there are some elevated hotspots of crime. And back in the day, in the mid-2000s, crime was significantly higher than it is today. On Friday, March 31st, Brian had dinner with his father, Randy, and brother, Derek. He had just completed a grueling week of tests and exams, and he needed some time away. Later on, his father, Randy, would indicate that he did not want Brian going out that night, but he shut his mouth, as a good father would. He didn't want to stray Brian from having a good time, but he did note Brian seemed really tired and was hoping he would call it a night in. Unfortunately, that is not what happened that night. At around 9 p.m., Brian met up with his best friend Clint at a bar called Ugly Tuna, a staple college bar in downtown Columbus. About an hour later, Brian calls his girlfriend Alexis and tells her that he loves her, hopes she's having a good night, and that he's going to continue partying with Clint. Brian and Clint continue drinking and bar hopping, later that night eventually meeting up with Clint's friend Meredith. Meredith drives Brian and Clint back to the Ugly Tuna, the bar where they started their night, for one last round. According to Clint and Meredith, they had more drinks at the bar. It was a busy night. People are partying. It is the beginning of spring break. There's live music. A lot of fun is being had. In fact, Brian told Meredith and Clint that he was going to go talk to the band. This was the last correspondence Meredith and Clint had with Brian. When last call hit around 2 a.m., Brian was nowhere to be found. Meredith and Clint called Brian a few times. They looked through the bar. They waited outside. He was nowhere to be found. Evidently, Brian had a bit of a reputation for Irish goodbying, and I think we all sort of have that friend in our group that gets too drunk and sort of heads home. So Meredith and Clint didn't really think too much about the fact that they couldn't find Brian. They assumed that Brian was kind of drunk as they were with him all night drinking, and that he made his way on foot to his apartment. His apartment wasn't that far away, and as I said, he's sort of been known to do this in the past. They didn't think anything of it, and they headed home themselves. The next day, though, Brian's girlfriend Alexis could not get in touch with him. She called him numerous times, and he did not pick up. By the time Sunday rolled around, Alexis was super concerned. She could not get in touch with Brian. She had no idea where he was. So she panics and calls his father, Randy. When Randy had also indicated that he had not heard from Brian on Friday, the two drove to Brian's apartment to check on him. When they arrived at Brian's apartment, he wasn't there. His car was there, but his keys, wallet, and phone were missing. In fact, it looked like Brian had never even come home from that Friday night. This deeply disturbed both Alexis and Randy. They called the police and filed a missing persons report. As mentioned earlier, there was a decent amount of crime in the area, so many of the bars were equipped with surveillance cameras. The Ugly Tuna was no exception. However, what investigators were about to find was bizarre. They obtained surveillance footage from the night that Brian disappeared. One thing to note about the Ugly Tuna is you have to take an escalator in order to get inside. There are no cameras inside the premises, only in the area of the escalators. There are two shots of footage of Brian from that night. He is first seen on the escalator with Meredith and Clint approaching the bar. He then enters the frame a little while later where he's seen talking to two women. He then walks out of frame and back inside the bar. For me, when I look at this footage of Brian, especially when he's talking to the two women, it does in fact look like he is swaying. It's a very quick video, but to me, he definitely looks inebriated. I believe Clint and Meredith's claim that Brian was very drunk that night. On top of the fact that he just spent an entire week studying and prepping for finals and taking tests, exhaustion mixed with a heavy night of drinking never ends well. So we see Brian on camera heading inside the Ugly Tuna. We should be seeing him leave, right? Perhaps we can correlate it with a timestamp, see what time roughly he went home, or even better, if he left with someone. Except there is no footage of Brian leaving the bar, like at all. Investigators accounted for every single person that night. Customers, staff, the band, but Brian was never captured leaving. Now, there are a few explanations for this, but they are just as weird. There were two other ways Brian could have left the bar that night that weren't the front entrance, which we know he didn't go through because he's not on camera leaving. The two other possible exits were a back alleyway that was predominantly used by the staff and through a construction site. The bar was undergoing heavy renovations in one area, and though it's technically possible, it would have been really hard for Brian to navigate through the construction site, especially as drunk as he was. It would have been hard for most sober people to walk through the dark through this construction site, let alone somebody that was near plastered. Now back to that other staff exit. This was potentially a route that Brian would take. The back door led to an alleyway, and though there was surveillance, it was slow moving and it panned the area. So technically, Brian could have accidentally evaded the security. If he happened to walk out the door at the right moment while the frame was panning elsewhere, it's very likely that he could have, as I said, accidentally evaded being captured on surveillance. Suppose Brian did leave through this back alleyway. It was in the direction to his apartment, so it makes sense. What could have happened to Brian on his way home? Did he witness a crime being taken place and was abducted? Did somebody try to mug him and he fight back? The weird thing is that there's no evidence left behind. There was no blood. None of Brian's belongings were on the floor. There was no scuffle or any immediate evidence to suggest there was. Not to mention, this is also a really busy area. The bars were popping, people were celebrating spring break. So, wouldn't someone have heard or saw something go down? It's all so strange. Another theory is that Brian left on his own accord, whether to sadly take his own life or start anew. In that event, did he avoid the camera on purpose? Again, I have to say this again because it's just really important. He was hammered. This wasn't like I had a couple of drinks and I have like a buzz on. Not only do his friends, but a lot of people in the bar said he was completely gone. So, would he have the wherewithal to be able to, I don't know, start a new identity being that fucking drunk? Probably not. Could he have walked home only to accidentally die, maybe drown in the nearby Olatengi River? This actually might be plausible. It's not uncommon for a man, especially after a night of heavy drinking, to have to go to the bathroom on his 30-minute walk home. They were by a body of water. Maybe Brian decided to stop off and relieve himself and he fell in and drowned. These things have happened in the past to other people. His father actually thought that theory could be very well possible, and he had investigators and a search party look through the waters, but nothing was ever found. Another dead end. We could go on and on about what and how and why. The fact is, Brian disappeared 16 years ago, and sadly, we're no close to understanding what happened to him on that fateful night. Through the years, Clint has not been helpful in the investigation, which is a shame because he was really the last person to have seen Brian. He's the last one to have spoke to him. Maybe there's some piece of tiny information Clint is leaving out, some tiny morsel of detail that would explain Brian's state of mind or what could have happened to him on his way home. Investigators interviewed everyone at the bar that night, including the two women that Brian was seen speaking to and the band. The weird thing is, as I mentioned earlier, Brian had told Meredith and Clint that he was going to go talk to the band for a bit. But according to the band, nobody ever came to speak to them that night. They have no recollection whatsoever of Brian or anybody matching that description and said that nobody had any conversations with them. They went, they did their set, and they left. They had absolutely nothing to give investigators. They had no information, making it even weirder. Why would he tell his friends he was going to go talk to the band and then disappear into thin air? Cadaver dogs were brought into the area. Police looked through sewers, dumpsters, everything. No trace of Brian. Brian's credit cards and bank accounts were never touched, and his cell phone never displayed any activity as well. Brian was a huge fan of Pearl Jam and has a tattoo on his upper right arm of the stick figure portrayed on Pearl Jam's Alive album artwork. If you have any information on Brian Schaefer's disappearance, contact Crime Stoppers at the number below. 5 cases, 5 people that had friends and family and loved ones that deserve the closure to know what happened to their son, their daughter, their partner. Hopefully somebody out there has some more information. Till next time.